This will be a very different style full service guide on the Fox 36 Rhythem. And this also applies to every fork with a grip sweeper lever adjustment. So you need to do a full service. You need to swap the damper fluid because Fox has basically made the Teflon 5-weight fluid obsolete. The 4-weight Motor X fluid will make the fork ride better. So whether or not your fork needs a full service, you're gonna benefit. First, massive tip. Do this on cardboard because you're gonna make a mess. Only the most experienced suspension mechanic is not gonna make a mess. Like, I still make a massive mess. First step, spray that fork down. Degreaser, just wipe it down with a cloth. Knock off the big chunks. You don't need to detail this thing because it's gonna turn into the Exxon Valdez in a second. On the air spring side of the fork, we have a Schrader valve. So if you get this like $4 Schrader valve tool, you can pull it out. It's a really good idea to do this because you want to do an inspection on this guy, make sure it's not ripped or losing air. So if you're rocking the Fox 36 Rhythem, you're probably not flush with cash. And neither am I. So I did an inspection on it, it looks good. It's going to go back in the fork. On the air spring side, we have a 10mm, and it's probably not advisable to use an impact gun, but it works if you have one. On the damper side is a 15mm. Use your impact gun or your ratchet to loosen that one off as well. So fully remove the nuts from the lower legs and pull the crush washers out and make sure they're not ripped. So this is one part that needs to be replaced. It's a ripped crush washer. If it's not ripped, I'll show you a technique at the end of the video so you can reuse it. So you're going to take the nut, screw it back on, put your socket back on the nut, and you're going to hit the socket with a hammer. This will jar the damper and the air spring loose. Repeat for the 10mm and the 15mm side. After you've broken those free, I like to get 2 bowls to catch the lower leg fluid from both sides. It's super important to check the oil because you want to see if there's chunky metal or which side had damage. Once the lower and the upper legs are separated, it's basically a game of inspect and clean. It's a tedious process and very unexciting. Suspension repair or maintenance is like being a glorified oil changer at Jiffy Lube. So the next step, we should start on the air spring because it's the easiest part. So there's basically this like clip ring thing holding the air spring in. It's the same concept as the keychain. You need to separate this with a tiny screwdriver. Do not be afraid of it. Just remember, you're trying to separate this ring just like you're putting a key on your key ring. Once your key ring's removed, you need to tug on that air spring and she'll pop right out. So you can tell this one's never been serviced because it has a big cake of oil on the top. And this is what Fox does at the factory. I think they do this at the factory because they know no one's ever going to service the fork, and this ensures a long life of longevity. So this is kind of an optional step at this point. So I'm going to remove the top cap on the air spring side so it's easier to clean inside the stanchion. And I'm not going to lie, you have to get this tool and it can be really challenging. Like this one was so tight, I really did struggle for quite a bit. But as long as you get this tool, you can get the job done with some friends or some force. Now we have the air spring side fully stripped down. Let's strip down the damper side. A tiny little Allen key will remove your grip sweeper lever. And now it's time to hopefully not struggle on removing the damper. It's a 27mm. And the irony of this fork is the air spring side was cemented shut and I had to use all my force. The damper side was literally hand tight. So it may be a good idea to Loctite the damper in because this one was getting loose. So if you made it this far in the video, you need to know this fork is not easy to service. Like my first one was an utter disaster, so make sure you apply these techniques. Whether you replace the dust wipers or not, you need to pull them out. A 22mm open end wrench will pry them out. Everything is pretty tight fitting on these Fox forks, so you may struggle. Everything is stripped down, so it's time to do a full inspection on this chassis. So there's definitely some stanchion damage here, and it's not worth fixing or repairing. Remember, this is a budget fork. I have another RockShox Zeb video where I repair part of the stanchion, but this one's good to go. So stuff some towels in the upper or the lower part of the upper crown and spray it full of alcohol and push those rags through so we can get all that grease, mud, and anything else that's inside the fork. Remember, inside your fork is what matters and it needs to be clean. I do not want to downplay lower leg services, but to be honest, they really don't do much as far as feel or performance. If you want to have some gains, you gotta go into the damper. So you don't have to buy these shaft clamps. But there's a whole bunch of cheap sets on eBay specifically for servicing grip dampers. I've fully serviced these forks with no shaft clamps. Basically, you take the top cap and you're gonna put it in a vise on the wrench flats, and you can crack this damper open with a crescent wrench. So you can do this like holding it awkwardly in your hand and do this full service. But since I have the shaft clamps, I'm just gonna pop it in there. So our goal is to unthread the top cap from the compression tube. Once it's fully unscrewed, you need to put a rag around it and pull the compression assembly out with a rag because it's gonna make a mess. So now we're gonna take that compression tube and we're gonna pump her out. And check out how nasty this fluid is. So the performance of this fork was pretty bad, and my friend was like, yeah, this fork sucks. And I'm like, yeah, I totally agree. Your damper's full of mud. This is the Fox Grip compression assembly, and it's a really good one. And as long as you don't take this guy apart, the damper service is extremely easy on this fork. We have no swollen seals and all the springs are working, so I'm going to spray it off with alcohol and put it back in the fork. The real problem is the muddy damper oil and why the performance of this fork was so bad. So take the compression tube and fill it up with that 4-weight Motorex Fox fluid. I promise you, by putting this fluid in your fork, it will ride better. We're going to fill it all the way up to the bleed hole. I don't know, just put some fluid in it so the rebound piston on the bottom is submerged in oil. I recommend getting a box, some more cardboard, because it's going to make a mess. And what you're going to do is basically pump the rebound rod maybe 5 or 6 times. It will slurp a few times and then it's pretty much fully bled. With the rebound rod all the way pulled down, you want to fill the damper up to the bleed hole and hopefully not have it squirt oil all over yourself. So basically we're filled up to that bleed hole. Rebound rod is in the fully down setting. We're going to take the compression assembly here and unthread this needle. It's turned in there by hand. Set that to the side, and then you're going to slowly push that compression assembly into the fork. This will make a mess, like 100%, so make sure you have some rags handy. You're going to take that compression assembly and push it into the tube that's full of oil, and a little bit will squirt out, so have a rag handy. Once it's fully tightened in the tube, you're going to put the compression needle back inside. This will seal the oil inside. Unfortunately, I didn't film this step very good, but you need to do this balancing act of installing the damper in the upper CSU of the fork, turning the compression needle, and then installing the knob so it's in the lockout setting in the right orientation, and then you need to put it to the fully soft setting so you can join the two upper and lower legs together. I'll leave it here so you can pause this and I'll go for the next step. The final couple steps. So we got 20-weight Fox Gold oil. This is excellent suspension oil, but if you don't have Fox 20-weight gold oil, any suspension lubricant will work for the lower legs. On the damper side, you have to use damper fluid for the O-ring. We can identify the damper fluid by being red. Because this damper purges oil out into the lower legs, you have to use the same damper oil. On Fox 36 forks, especially, I find it easiest to put the foam rings in first before the dust wipers. Make sure you're putting the dust wiper in the right side as far as the fluid soakage. On the right side, we have the damper soaked one. On the left side is the Airspring 20-weight gold side. Once these foam rings are setting flush, we're going to pound some new dust wipers in there. If you take the 4-weight top cap from the oil, it is the perfect orientation for the dust wiper. You need to drive this in evenly with a soft hammer. It can be pretty challenging or pretty easy. You're going for a flush mount on the upper part of the casting of the fork. This one went pretty smooth, but I've serviced some Fox 36 Rhythms that were just an absolute nightmare. So we're going to put those Energizer springs off the dust wipers up on the CSU of the crown. This will allow you to join the upper and the lowers a little bit easier. Do not forget the sag indicator O-ring. So joining these two can be really difficult. Sometimes they get stuck on the bushings because they don't have the best bushing tolerances. It's an older fork. Sometimes you need to tap on the CSU to join them together. Be careful tapping here, but that's your only option. Once they're joined together, you're going to suck up about 40 cc's of damper oil, the red good stuff, and push it into the damper side. The larger hole is the damper side. It seems like a lot of oil, and it is, because the damper soaks it up throughout its life cycle. The air spring side takes about 10-20 cc's of the Fox 20-weight gold oil. Make sure you have a different syringe or clean the one you're using very good. Fortunately, I have a new syringe, and do not buy the Fox one. This is the Fox one, and it's absolutely terrible. Tighten up the 10 and the 15 millimeter lower nuts. Make sure the crush washer is installed on those two nuts. I had to replace the damper side, but I reused the air spring side. Add like 50 psi of pressure because we need to make sure those crush washers are absolutely seated. The last and final step is very important, and it's not in the Fox instructions. It is absolutely vital if you do not want your fork to leak oil when you're done. So make sure both the 10 and the 15 millimeter nuts have crush washers and they're tightened and there's 50 psi in the fork. Once those nuts are completely tight, leave the socket on there and hammer on the socket. At this point, we've seated the crush washer, and it was literally half a turn loose. You need to keep doing this step until those nuts are completely tight after hammering on the socket or the ratchet. Make sure you install all the rebound dust covers and lock nuts so you don't lose this stuff. Before putting all your tools away, make sure you dyno test this thing and it locks out. So if you have a Fox 36 Rhythm, good chance you have a Fox Float X. And it's a really difficult shock to bleed the air out of, but I made it simple with this video, so click it on your screen right now.